"Mama, that lady looks lonely." Rin Calloway looked up from the swing she was pushing and followed her 4-year-old daughter Juniper's gaze. 2 swings down, an elderly woman sat completely still, both hands folded over a worn leather purse in her lap, looking at nothing in particular, with the patient, hollowed expression of someone who has learned to occupy space without expecting anything from it. Rin was 30 years old, a single mother who worked bookkeeping hours from home between school drop-offs and park afternoons, and she had learned in those years that Juniper's observations about people were almost always accurate in the way that children's observations are, unfiltered, and therefore true. She hesitated only a moment. Then she pushed Juniper's swing one more time, walked the 2 spaces over, and sat down in the empty swing beside the woman. "Mind if we sit near you?" she asked. "Juniper likes company." The woman turned. She had silver hair and kind, tired eyes, and the composed bearing of someone who had once known how to fill a room, and now mostly chose not to. "I don't mind at all," she said. Her name was Loretta Finn. She was 72 years old, and she had been coming to Cedarwood Park every Tuesday afternoon for 11 months, since her husband Harold had passed, because this bench, these swings, this particular angle of afternoon light, had been where they walked together on weekends for 30 years. She came because leaving felt like forgetting, and she wasn't ready to forget. Rin didn't know any of this yet. She just sat beside her and pushed Juniper and let the silence be comfortable instead of filling it. Juniper characteristically filled it herself. "Do you have grandkids?" she asked Loretta with the directness of someone who sees no reason for preamble. Loretta smiled, slowly, like something waking up. "No, sweetheart, I don't." Juniper considered this seriously. "That's okay. You can watch me swing." Loretta laughed. It was a small sound, surprised out of her, and it changed her face entirely. Rin watched it happen and felt something warm settle in her chest. They stayed for an hour. Rin learned Loretta's name and that she'd been a high school librarian for 28 years, and that she took her tea with just a little honey. Loretta learned that Juniper's favorite color changed daily, and that Rin drove 40 minutes each way to a farmer's market every Saturday because Juniper had once cried over a tomato, and Rin had decided fresh produce was non-negotiable after that. They laughed about small things. The conversation moved the way good conversations do between people who have no agenda, slowly, honestly, with room to breathe. What neither of them noticed was the man sitting on the far bench under the oak tree with a paper cup of coffee and a leather journal he wasn't writing in. He had been there when they arrived, and he was still there when the afternoon deepened, and he was watching, not intrusively, but with the quiet attention of someone who has learned to notice what the world offers when you sit still long enough.
His name was Stellan Voss. He was 33 years old, and he was, by any conventional measure, the most quietly powerful man in Cartwell County. His family had ranched the land outside town for 3 generations, and Stellan had grown it from a working ranch into a diversified agricultural operation that employed 41 people and supplied 6 counties. He was not flashy about it. He drove a truck with a dent in the passenger door and knew every one of his employees by name and first learned their children's names before he learned their job titles. He came to Cedarwood Park on Tuesday afternoons because it was the 1 hour of the week he allowed himself to do nothing useful. His late mother had brought him here as a child. The habit had survived her. He watched a young woman sit down uninvited beside a lonely widow and simply offer her presence. He watched a 4-year-old tell a grieving stranger she could watch her swing. He watched Loretta Fenn, whom he recognized because he knew most people in Cartwell, laugh for the first time in what he suspected was a long while. He didn't approach them. That wasn't who he was. He finished his coffee and drove back to the ranch. But he came back the following Tuesday, and Wren and Juniper were there again, and so was Loretta, and this time they had saved Loretta's usual swing. Stellan watched from his bench and felt something he hadn't felt in years, the specific warmth of witnessing goodness that doesn't know it's being witnessed. On the 3rd Tuesday, Juniper spotted him. Children notice things adults have trained themselves to overlook. She marched across the grass and stood in front of his bench with her hands on her hips. "Why do you always sit by yourself?" Stellan looked at her with genuine surprise. "I like the quiet." "Mama says quiet is good," Juniper said, "but too much quiet gets heavy." She tilted her head. "You can sit with us if you want." He looked past her to where Wren was already watching, with an expression caught between embarrassment and amusement. He stood up, picked up his coffee, and walked over. His name was Stellan. He shook Wren's hand and nodded to Loretta, who recognized him and raised her eyebrow slightly. He sat on the bench beside the swings and said very little and listened considerably more, which was how he operated in every room he'd ever been in and which Wren found, without quite articulating it, deeply restful. What Wren didn't know, what she had no context to know, was that her landlord had recently filed a notice of intent to sell the small house on Birchfield Road where she and Juniper had lived for 2 years. The property management company had been bought, the new owners wanted the unit vacant, and Wren had 60 days. She had told no one because there was no one to tell who could do anything about it, and she was quietly, steadily terrified. Stellan learned this 3 weeks later, not from Wren, but from Loretta. The two women had grown genuinely close by then. Tuesday Parks had become Wednesday tea at Loretta's kitchen table, and Loretta had mentioned it with the careful worry of someone who has adopted a young family and takes the responsibility seriously. Stellan didn't act impulsively. He made 2 calls and checked 3 things and thought about it for 4 days. He owned a rental property on Dunmore Lane, a small house, well-maintained, sitting empty since his previous tenants had relocated. He called his property manager and set the rent at a figure Wren could manage, and then he called Wren directly. He told her what he had and what it cost and that it was available. No performance, no grand gesture, just information offered plainly by someone who had something useful and saw a clear reason to offer it. Wren was quiet for a long moment on the phone. Then she said, "Why are you doing this?" He was quiet too, briefly. "Because I watched you sit next to a lonely woman in a park and give her an afternoon. That kind of thing doesn't happen enough, and I can make one thing easier for someone who makes things easier for others." She moved into the house on Dunmore Lane 6 weeks later. Loretta brought a plant for the kitchen windowsill. Juniper declared her new bedroom the best room in the history of rooms. On the first Tuesday after the move, the 4 of them were at Cedarwood Park. Wren pushing Juniper, Loretta on the bench, Stellan with his coffee under the oak tree, though he was sitting closer now, part of the circle rather than apart from it. Juniper pumped her legs and looked back at all of them and said, with the authority of someone who has decided everything is exactly right, "This is my favorite place." Wren looked at Lorette, who was smiling in the full, unguarded way she hadn't smiled in over a year. Then she looked at Stellan, who was watching Juniper with the quiet expression of a man rediscovering something he hadn't known he missed.
Mine too, Wren said softly. Kindness is not a transaction. It's not performed for reward or witnessed for recognition. It is simply the choice to sit beside someone who looks lonely, to include someone who is outside the circle, to offer your afternoon to a stranger with nothing to gain. That choice, made simply and honestly in a park on a Tuesday, has a way of growing into something none of us could have planned. Show up, sit down, let kindness be ordinary. It will do the rest. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.